The following is a presentation from the MJCast, the internet's premier podcast on all things Michael Jackson.
I'm a Black American. I am proud of who I am.
Together, we can make a change in the world. I want to see you!
I like to take sounds and put them under the microscope. There's a driving bass if you become the bass. Let the music write itself.
I don't sing it if I don't mean it.
Welcome to the MJCast, your source of news, discussion, and interviews on the King of Pop.
Welcome to episode 129 of the MJCast. I'm your host, Elise Capron, and today I'm honored to be joined by three longtime Michael Jackson fans who have had a particularly special experience with the King of Pop. Our primary guest on this episode is Talitha Linehan. Talitha is the author of the recently published memoir, Michael Jackson and Me, A Real-Life Fairy Tale, which details the 13-year period during which she traveled all over the world to see Michael, everywhere from concerts with thousands of other people to small gatherings in his various homes. Talitha is a writer originally from County Cork, Ireland, and she has lived in the United States since 2005, currently residing in Los Angeles. I'm also joined by two of Talitha's close friends, Arus and Talin. Arus Tee is a Los Angeles-based graphic designer who has been a big fan since 2003, and Talin is based in Pasadena, where she attended the 1993 Super Bowl, at which, of course, Michael performed the halftime show. The previous year was her very first time seeing Michael Jackson at the filming of Will You Be There, where, during multiple takes, she heard the song several times before Dangerous was even released. I know we could have a whole episode about those experiences in itself, and I wish we could talk about that stuff too. We'll have to have you on another time. Talitha, Arus, and Talin connected as fan friends in 2008 and shared amazing experiences with Michael Jackson together. As for Talitha's book, Talin was a valuable contributor, and Arus designed the whole book, taking inspiration from classic book designs and themes. Ladies, I'm so happy to have you join us today to give us unique insights into your experiences with Michael Jackson. Your perspective not only gives other Michael Jackson fans an insider view into what it was like to be a particularly dedicated fan, but you saw firsthand how much MJ's fans truly meant to him, and you were present during the last months of his life, which, for a lot of us, is a time which remains shrouded in mystery and conjecture. Clearly, we have a lot to dive into, and I'm excited to get started. I do want to let listeners know that the conversation will be primarily guided by Talitha's story, although I absolutely welcome Arus and Talin to chime in as well. So with all of our special guests, we like to go all the way back to the beginning. So Talitha, can you tell us when you first discovered Michael Jackson?
Okay, well, my very first memory of Michael is from when I was 7 years old and I watched the movie The Wiz, and I just fell in love with the Scarecrow. I didn't know who Michael Jackson was. I didn't know that this was Michael Jackson. I hadn't had a lot of access to pop culture. I grew up in the countryside in Ireland. I mean, we had one TV channel, and I was still very young at the time, obviously. So it was a few years later in the late 1980s when I really became aware of pop culture. And at the time, Michael was, of course, at the pinnacle of his career. And everyone I knew was a fan. Everybody loved his music and his movies, his short films, his videos, whatever you want to call them. And I did too. I loved him. He was my favorite artist. I had posters all over my walls in my bedroom, and I had more posters of Michael than any other artist. But it was really when I was 13 years old and I watched Moonwalker for the first time that everything changed for me. That was the moment I became a mega fan. And it was as if I saw Michael for the very first time, not only as an artist, but also as a human being. And I just felt this real connection with him. I felt so drawn to him. And I knew from then on, he would always be a huge part of my life.
Moonwalker was also a major gateway for me, so I'm glad we have that in common. Now, you first saw MJ in concert in 1992 on the Dangerous tour in Dublin, and when you were a teenager. Can you briefly take us through those early years when you first started going to concerts?
Right. Well, I was 15 years old when Michael came to Dublin in Ireland on the Dangerous tour, and I had to beg permission to go from my parents. Like I said, I grew up in the countryside. I had quite a sheltered childhood. And to go to a pop concert in Dublin was a huge deal. So I had to beg and beg and beg. And eventually they said, oh, yes, you can go, but you can only go if you go with your aunt. You sit in the stands, and that's how you're going to watch this concert, which was perfectly fine with me. I was so excited. It was the best day of my life, bar none. So you could say I started to go to concerts then, but really I just went to that one. And it was 4 years later when I went to my next concert, and that was the opening concert of the history tour in Prague. It was my first time leaving Ireland, and it was an entirely different experience because by now I was an adult. So I had a lot more freedom, and I was able to go to the concert very early in the morning. I made it to the second row, and it was crazy and amazing and quite brutal from the perspective of the crowd experience. It was really rough. And the next day, my body was black and blue head to toe, but it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. I didn't care.
No, that sounds completely amazing. So at this point, I mean, your fandom, it's very fair to say, escalated pretty quickly from this point on. So you went from attending a concert to, waiting outside hotels for hours at a time. And when you were still pretty young, you became what was known in the fan community as a follower. So at the age of 20, you packed up your life and you actually started following Michael Jackson around on the history tour, along with one of your very close friends who was known as Tick. And she was only 17 at the time, which just boggles my mind. I can't imagine doing that as a teenager. How did you two manage that? And what was that like being a young person?
Right. So that was summer 1997, and this was the second leg of the history tour. And of course, I'd had a taste of it already in 96 in Prague, and I really wanted to do more concerts. So initially, I planned to do the 4 in England and then the one in Ireland in July. And I'd saved up my money for that, and I was good to go. But then when I was on the steps of Wembley, where you would wait overnight, by the way, if you wanted to be at the front row, which I did very much, then you would line up there from around 6 the evening before the concert. And of course, you would engage with the other fans. And that was what was so amazing about going on tour, was then I was completely immersed in his world for the first time in my life, because I'd grown up pre-internet. And so it was a very, isolating experience to be a fan. You didn't know other mega fans. You knew people who loved his music, but that was about it. And now suddenly I was meeting these other mega fans. And one of those mega fans was a girl I refer to by her nickname, Tick. And we just hit it off, and we decided we want to follow the tour. We don't want to just do these concerts in England and Ireland. We want to go and follow like these other fans that we've heard of are doing. So how did I manage it? Thankfully, I didn't have to manage it, because I don't know how I would have done that. I was not an experienced traveler at that point. I'd never really been anywhere, but Tick's mom was amazing. And she created this entire itinerary for us of how we would get from one venue to the next. And our plan was just to go and not even to stay in hotels. Like, we would either sleep on trains or buses, because we would be in transit, or else we would sleep outside the stadiums, again, like lining up so we could make it to that front row, which was always the goal. But, after a few concerts, we actually ended up being adopted by the crew. And so we ended up traveling across Europe in the crew trucks, and just, waking up and being backstage sometimes. And they would actually escort us to the front barrier before the beginning of every concert, before the gates opened to the public. So we got to be at the front row every time. So we were just really lucky. I think we seemed kind of helpless, because Tick was really young. She was only 17 and I was 20, but I looked about 14. I've always looked quite young for my age. So I really think that worked to my advantage. And it just ended up being such a dream.
So you mentioned that Tick's mother was really helpful. What about your parents, though? How did they feel about you running off? And I mean, I guess you were an adult at this point, so maybe they didn't have a say in it, but did they have any opinion of you doing this?
Oh, no, they definitely had a say in it. Like, even though I was 20 years old, I still had to get their permission, because I was a student, and I didn't have any money. I'd spent all my money on the first 4 concerts. So they had to fund my trip, for the rest of that summer. So they absolutely had a say. I needed their support. I couldn't have done it otherwise. And I think they supported me a little bit reluctantly. I remember my mom saying, "Oh, okay, just go, just get it out of your system." That kind of backfired big time. So semi-supportive, but I mean, I'm obviously so grateful that they allowed me to go and do that and just pursue my dream.
Absolutely. And pretty amazing that the crew really took you under their wings and helped you in that way. I think that's amazing. Do you have one particular favorite moment from those history tour shows that you could share?
Well, all of my favorite moments are the moments of personal interaction with Michael. Now, I never met him per se on the tour, but when he was performing, people don't realize this, but he was actually interacting the whole time with all of the fans along the front barrier, many of whom he would have recognized, because there were followers of the tour. And some of those followers I never saw again. They were strictly tour followers. Others, of course, were the fan followers who I would see in many years to come at various events. But yeah, he would interact with each one of us. He would sing to us, point to us. When he said, "I love you" to the entire stadium, it was usually directed at one of these mega fans. And after a few concerts, he started to recognize Tick and me. And so he would interact with us. And the most amazing interaction was in Copenhagen on August 14th, when he actually bowed to us during the Heal the World. And he did that because he'd gotten a gift at the beginning of the show from us via Jennifer Batten, who we had met at a previous concert, who was his guitarist. So that's a really memorable moment for me. But, there were so many, of course.
Yeah, and you even have a photo with Jennifer Batten of that moment when you gave her the gift, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
it's
Yeah.
great.
We met her
Yeah.
backstage because
Yeah,
we were hanging out backstage because of the crew. So it all just, worked out perfectly. Yeah.
that's great. Yeah, you've got so many really awesome photos in the book, as well, and, just another reason to check it out, but I did enjoy that one quite a bit. It brings me right back to that
Yeah.
era.
Yeah.
Um, so one question I would love just your frank take on in terms of, being someone who saw a lot of the history tour shows. So the history tour is now, unfortunately, mostly known for a lot of Michael's possible over-reliance on lip syncing, which was really quite a far cry from some of his performances in years past. Did this bother you at all as someone in the audience, or did his performance and presence just completely overshadow that to the point where it was not an issue for you?
It was definitely not an issue for me. No, I didn't care, Like, honestly, he could have just stood on stage for 2 hours and smiled and I would have been in heaven. And that's not to say that I do not adore his performance, which of course I do. I was going crazy over every song, every dance move. And we would actually dance along with him from the front barrier. We would copy all of his hand movements, in every song. So, I mean, absolutely a fan of Michael Jackson, and not just Michael, but I'm more a fan of Michael. And just to be that close to him and to see him in real life was amazing. But also, I mean, Michael was the person, I think, who he transformed the music video. He also transformed the stage performance. And, it went from being just a singer singing a song to the spectacle. And for me, history was a spectacle. It was more about the showmanship. And hey, we all know Michael sings. He sings like an angel. So that was never in question. And no, it didn't bother me whatsoever. Maybe some of the tour followers who were more like the Michael Jackson fans might have had an issue with it. I don't know, but I certainly did not.
On that note, did any of the other followers ever bring that up during the time, or was that just not a point of discussion?
No, not from my perspective, but I
Mhm.
wasn't really with the other followers so much at that point. I didn't really know them yet.
Right.
I was mostly just with Tick, or I was with the crew. So
Mhm.
I don't know if that was ever a discussion or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I never got to see Michael Jackson in concert, so I am just incredibly jealous that you got to
Oh,
see him so many times.
yeah.
And so this is a little bit of a sensitive question, but I would like to touch on it. So obviously, Michael Jackson very, very tragically passed away in preparing for This Is It, which we will be talking about in detail later. But, there always have been rumors going around that Michael was reportedly engaging in some risky behaviors during the history era around some prescription drug use. Did you see at that time any signs of him doing that sort of thing, or that going on at all?
Oh no, no, not at all. I mean, I mostly just saw him on stage performing. I rarely saw him off stage, and if I did, it was very briefly outside hotels. So, I wouldn't have had the perspective then to even realize if anything was wrong. It was my first time really being around him, but no, I certainly didn't see anything to indicate that anything was wrong in that regard. No.
So going back to exciting stuff, when did you first get to meet Michael in person?
Okay, the first time I met him was in May 2000 at the Dorchester Hotel in London. And so he was there with Elizabeth Taylor at that time. She was attending a tribute show, and he was going to accompany her to that at the Royal Albert Hall. And on the day he arrived, he came out in the evening and he got into a van. And his bodyguard at the time was sitting in the front passenger seat. And he started pointing a tick in me because we were standing like a few feet in front of the van. And at first we thought he was indicating to us to move aside. So we did so, but actually he was beckoning us to come over. We just didn't realize that because that would have been the last thing on our mind, you know? But he got out of the van and he came over and he put a hand on each of our shoulders and he steered us over to the van. And one of our friends kind of got pulled along with us. And he pulled us through the crowd and he stood us in front of the van door and he slid the van door open and there inside was Michael. And that was my very first time meeting him. And it was because Wayne recognized us from the tour and I think he liked us. You know, we were always like really calm when we saw Michael at the car. We would just, you know, we wouldn't like other fans some of them would run out the car and like bang on the windows and everything outside stadiums. And we never did anything like this. So I think he really liked us and appreciated us for that. And so, you know, this was a way of 3 years later rewarding us for that behavior. So, yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Well, it seems throughout your, fan experience, what really made it different in a lot of ways is that, yeah, you weren't the crazy person rushing up to the window. You always said you waited to be invited. And I think that probably made a huge, huge difference to him. And clearly he noticed it.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, all the followers were like that, really. I think it was just the tour, everything was manic and crazy, and people would just lose their minds, you know. But mostly it wasn't like that the rest of the time around Michael. People were generally pretty calm. Of course, that changed if it was too many fans, and then they're all trying to like scrabble to get closer to him, then it could get quite chaotic. But if it was only a dozen or so fans, usually everyone was like super calm. So it might be different to what people would imagine, but yeah.
Yeah. And if it was crazy, you ended up black and blue, as you mentioned.
Wow, that was extreme. Yeah. I mean, I know followers who went to dozens of concerts. I mean, you think 17 is a lot. I know people who went to almost 100 concerts, you know, people who started following in the late 1980s and were extremely prolific, especially when it came to the tours. And some of them have told me Prague was the worst crowd experience of their lives. So for me, that was only my second concert and I was a teenage girl, you can imagine. And I thought that was normal then. So I was really dreading that for the next concert I went to, but it was a completely different experience. Thankfully, in 97, I guess they'd figured it out by then and it was a lot more comfortable.
Yeah. You're like, do I always get trampled at
That's
every
what
show
I
I'm going to go to?
thought. That's what I thought.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So in the early 2000s, you really started traveling even more at that point, and that included coming to the United States. So you talk about this time as the golden era in the fan world. Can you speak a bit more to why you feel this was the case?
Okay, well, that's not even based on my own experience because obviously my golden era came later, the time when I was, you know, spending more time with Michael. But from a fan perspective or a follower perspective, the reason I call that the golden era is because fans who had started following in the 1980s, a few of them told me it was almost impossible to meet Michael back then. And well into the 90s, it was almost impossible. And then our generation came along. So I came of age during history and I was 19 when the tour began. And so did my kind of generation of followers. And we came along and we really started following prolifically, you know, around 99, 2000. And we would show up and we would meet Michael maybe once, twice, 3 times a trip. You know, it was so easy for us compared to them. And it was like, that's not fair. You know, they would tell us, do you know how long we had to wait for our first meeting or how hard we had to work for every moment? And somehow it was just so much easier for us. And I'm not sure why, if that's because Michael really was at the pinnacle of his career in the 80s and 90s. But I mean, he was still hugely famous always and still caused chaos wherever he went. So I don't know why it was so much easier for us. Maybe he was making himself more accessible. Maybe it was because he had children and they kind of gave him a little more courage to step out of his shell and not be so shy, because of course he was always terribly shy. So yeah, I'm not sure why it was easier for us, but it was very easy. If you followed enough, you know, you were almost guaranteed to meet him many times, actually. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you got to do that, of course. So now taking the next step, you started getting access into Neverland a bit after this. So can you tell us a little bit about how that initially happened and perhaps maybe a couple of your favorite things about being at the ranch?
Sure. So Neverland in the early 2000s, when I really started following a lot, that was still considered very much off limits to fans. Like, I didn't know any fans personally who'd ever been inside the ranch, and I didn't think that was even possible. So it seemed like this very elusive, impossible dream. But then, when I was in New York to see Michael in August 2002, where he attended the MTV Music Awards, I heard a rumor that he was opening up Neverland to fans on his birthday. And my friends and I asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, yeah, just go. You guys can go." So here I was in New York, and in a couple of days' time, Neverland was going to open, and fans were going to be allowed in. And that was another dream of mine, but I couldn't make myself leave New York and fly over to California because I wanted to be where Michael was. So I missed out on that opportunity. But he'd also told us, "Hey, go to Neverland anytime. You're always welcome. Just come by whenever you want." And so a few of my friends and I, we went in February 2003 to Neverland to try to see Michael. The Martin Bashir documentary just come out. It was getting a lot of bad press, and we just wanted to go there and support him. And we weren't even sure if he was there or not, but either way, we would leave him letters and gifts and just show our support. And well, it turns out he was there, and he came out on would have been my last day before I left to go back to Europe. He came out and we met him, and he invited us to visit the ranch, and he actually told his staff to treat us like royalty.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, speaking of the Martin Bashir documentary, clearly, that and just, I mean, everything, all kinds of things that had happened through the 90s, Michael was dealing with a lot. And this kind of goes back to my question about being so open to fans. Do you think it was because he felt he was letting, in some ways you would think some celebrities may have just used some of these things to shut everyone out, but instead he welcomed you in more than ever. So do you think it was because he felt so safe with this particular group, or was there something else? You mentioned his children, which I think is an interesting point. I don't know. Do you have any other insight into that?
Well, I mean, the Martin Bashir documentary had come out, but I mean, this was before there were any allegations around that. So,
Sure.
this was just like basically one journalist's salacious voiceover that had
Mhm.
twisted the contents of this documentary. So I wouldn't have thought that would be a reason to shut people out anyway. But also, Michael was just so open always with his fans. I think he trusted us very much and saw us all, and not just my group, all fans, all followers, anyone, and by follower, I mean anyone who was just lucky enough to actually reach him in real life, because he loved all of his fans, those who could and could not travel to see him equally. So yeah, he was just very open with us. I don't really know why he didn't ever shut everyone out. Maybe he should have. I don't know.
Well, not that I'm suggesting that he should have,
Right.
but I think that it's amazing he was so open. It's just
Right.
it's kind of one of those, yeah, things I'm so curious about where I just feel like looking at the whole kind of last half of his life, I feel a lot of celebrities would have shut down, but he got closer and closer with this group of fans he really trusted. And I think there's something kind of amazing there, that is interesting to explore. But in any case, speaking back to Neverland again, while you were at Neverland in February of 2003, you crossed paths with Gavin Arvizo. Is there anything you can share about that particular experience?
Right. So Gavin, was there when we were there. And by the way, one of the girls in that group, Caroline, she does talk about this on the documentary Square One. So this is the same visit. We were there together in February. Yeah. Just for people if they're thinking, wait, doesn't she say something similar? Yeah, it was the same time. We were there together. So just to make that clear, Gavin Arvizo was there. So were his siblings. Like, we just said hi to them. We didn't really interact with them all that much. They were just around us. They were roaming the grounds, hanging out, playing. They were in the movie theater with us when we watched some of Michael's films on the big screen. They were at the house later when we had dinner there. So they just seemed like normal kids to us. Obviously, we didn't have a judgment about them at that stage. We didn't know what was going to happen. I will say they did seem to have the run of the place entirely. So months later, when there was this claim that they were being held against their will, obviously that was absolute nonsense. I mean, we were alone with them and we were adults from their perspective. Certainly, we were young adults. They could have said, please help us, we're being trapped. I mean, it was ludicrous. It was crazy. And one of Michael's lawyers, Brian Oxman, actually interviewed a few of us, myself included, about our experience that day, and he did add our names to the witness list, but we weren't called to testify. But we could give a firsthand account of them just having absolute freedom and free reign at Neverland.
Right. Very interesting. So speaking of Gavin Arvizo, we were just talking a moment ago about this golden age for Michael Jackson fans, but of course all of that changed with the trial. So the first hearing you attended was in April 2004, and you actually ended up moving from Germany to California so that you could attend the trial full time. Can you tell us a bit about what it was like being there on a daily basis?
So that was a really different time, obviously, being in the fan world and being around Michael than the previous years. I mean, there was such a heaviness hanging over us all, just such a weight of the reality of what Michael was going through. I mean, I can't even imagine. I don't know how one person could endure what he did. He had to sit in that courtroom day after day and listen to people saying the most horrific things about him, telling these horrible lies, and not being able to say a single word in his defense, and then knowing that those words were going to be broadcast to the world that night, as they inevitably were. And everything was just reported in a way that was very biased against Michael. The reporting did not reflect the reality of what was happening inside the courtroom, because even on the worst days where the most horrific lies were presented, I mean, there was always a rebuttal, and Tom Mesereau would cut through those lies and expose them for what they were. He did that so effectively, but that was rarely reported. So the lie would be reported and not the truth.
Yeah, and we're all, continue to be so grateful that Tom Mesereau continues to speak up for Michael Jackson, and is just an amazing advocate. He's fantastic. So you did, during the trial, you managed to get a media pass for quite a bit of the time. So not only did you have this, front row seat to what was playing out in the courtroom, which was all very intense and rather devastating, but you were in close proximity to many of the journalists who were covering the event. So can you speak a bit to the reporters' perspective on what was going on and how they were covering the trial?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't engage with them a whole lot, but I certainly overheard some very interesting conversations, especially in those final weeks where they really didn't think that the prosecution team had presented a strong case. Most of them were of the opinion that Michael would be found not guilty. However, that's not what they were reporting. Like, I literally heard a male reporter express that thought and that feeling about the trial, and then I saw that same man on TV that night completely presenting a different perspective, and almost implying that it was inevitable that Michael would be convicted, and then talking about what would happen if and when that occurred and where he would be taken and so on. And so there was this tendency to just play out this fantasy of Michael being convicted, and absolutely he was convicted in the court of public opinion. He was not given a fair trial in the court of public opinion whatsoever, and it was really disgusting. I studied journalism at university, and this was definitely not the type of journalism that I was taught to practice. I mean, journalists are supposed to be ethical, and reporting is supposed to be objective. And what I found about the US media in general is it tends to be very opinion driven and very slanted and very biased. In this case, like I said, it was absolutely biased against Michael, and it was just a witch hunt. It was disgusting. I mean, it was just sensationalism 100% all the time, practically. It was horrible.
Hmm.
It was horrible. It was shocking to me to see that, and
Hmm.
to really witness, like you said, firsthand, the contradiction between the reality of each day in the courtroom and then the slanted version that was presented by the media.
The ongoing story of so much of his
Yeah,
life, unfortunately.
yeah.
well, and of course, this trial was completely devastating to Michael Jackson. And I did just want to read one very, very short excerpt from your book, in which you quote Michael Jackson, and just because I think it's a lovely, representation of how I think maybe some of, you most dedicated fans who are there all the time, I feel like it's what got him through this in some ways. So you write, in later years, I never asked Michael about the trial because I never wanted to turn his attention to such darkness, but he brought it up a few times. During a late night conversation in September 2008, he told me, "What I went through, it just showed me there's so much evil in the world, but there's also so much beauty. You were there for me. I wrote a song for you, the fans, how you were there for me in my darkest hour and my deepest despair. I've written a song about all of you, how much you helped me, what you do for me." I think that's really, really powerful. So thank you for being there,
Oh, it
you and
was it
everyone.
was it was a privilege. It was a privilege. I know so many more fans would have wanted to be there in person and just weren't able to be. So, we were representing all of them in the best way that we could and
Mhm.
trying to show as much love and support to Michael as possible. But it was a privilege. It's always a privilege to be around him.
Yeah, well, he clearly felt that. Now, your book covers a 13-year period, right? But really, more than half the book is focused on what you have kind of called your personal golden era, which was from 2007 to 2009. And so, this was a time when your life as a fan changed quite a bit, and you were able to really start interacting personally with Michael on a regular basis. So, how would you say that things were different starting in 2007 when Michael had returned from Bahrain and he was living in Las Vegas? How was he different kind of post-trial, and how was he interacting with fans in a different way, specifically at this moment?
I don't think he was interacting with fans differently. It was the same Michael when you were in front of him. He was just as open and warm and loving and kind and gentle as he ever was. I had heard he'd become more difficult to meet again in that interval. Like I didn't see him for almost a year and a half after the trial. But my friends who went on trips at that time said it had become more difficult. Whether that's because he had become maybe a little bit more withdrawn because of the trauma of the trial or some other reason, I don't know. But I think for all of us, when we were actually with him, it was the same experience. I know he expressed a lot of gratitude to fans, especially in the first couple of trips after the trial. He went to London a few months afterwards, and I know many of my friends met him there, and that he just was so thankful to them. He expressed heartfelt gratitude for their support during the trial, and he actually also called a fan, an English fan, a few months later. He'd got a gift from her while he was in London that had photographs of the fans around the trial. And so he called her and also thanked her and said to please thank the other fans for being there. So as far as I'm aware, he was still as connected as ever to the fans. And like I said, when I started to meet him, it was the same Michael as ever. And really, what changed were the circumstances in which I was now able to see him. I lived in the U.S. and he moved back to the US, and almost all the followers were from Europe and so lived in Europe. So I was going to see him all alone, which was a completely different kind of experience. I mean, I'd known one fan ever who ever met Michael alone even once, and here I was, seeing him alone many times. So that was a completely different experience. I had a lot more time with him. So it was really the time and space is the reason I became close to Michael, because it allowed for that to happen.
Yeah, and actually on that exact front to follow up, at this point, I would say it's fair to say you really were shaping your life around Michael. So you rented an apartment in, wherever he was, and you were spending, like you said, hours, sometimes by yourself, like waiting on a roadside. How did this level of dedication affect other aspects of your life? Did you have to, I mean, I'm just so curious kind of looking at what you had to give up, really, I guess, to have this life. I think you have wrote about how you fortunately had a job that was really, flexible and understanding, and you could do from anywhere. But were there things you felt you had to give up, or was that just all worth it for what you were getting and that time you were getting with Michael?
Yeah, I didn't see that I had to give up anything, to be honest. And I'd always revolved built my life around this dream. I even remember when I was 17 and I was trying to decide if I wanted to be an actress or a writer. And I had the thought, well, if I become an actress, I'm going to be really tied to projects and I won't be able to just go see Michael if I want to. Like I really was even from the age of 17, I was designing my life in a way that I could go to see Michael if that opportunity arose. So being a writer, it's something I could do anywhere. All I needed was my laptop and my phone. And by the time I moved to the US, I was absolutely a free agent. I didn't even have a boss anymore. I was a freelancer. So I could do whatever I wanted. I could go wherever I wanted. By then, by the time Michael moved back to the US, I was well established in LA. I'd been living there for a year and a half. And so I had an apartment there. And I actually kept that apartment even when I moved to Vegas, because Vegas is so cheap in comparison. And to rent a room is, I think everywhere is probably really cheap compared to LA, but Vegas certainly is. So I was able to just rent a room there. And that was the only place where I rented an apartment and went to that extent. And the reason being, Michael actually told me I could come by his house anytime. And it always made him so happy to see me. So I was like, you know what? This pathway is open to me. I'm just going to take it. Like, just go for it. Why not? And don't overthink it. Just go for it. So that's what I did. I went out to Vegas. It's only a few hours from LA. Seems like the next town over from us. So it was pretty easy to transition over there. And yeah, just keep doing what I did. I mean, I would sit outside his house and I would be on my laptop writing, doing my work at the same time. So it was easy. It really was. Things just fell into place for me. I was extremely lucky.
With you kind of shaping your life around, everything you had going on with Michael, which again, I'm jealous of every moment you had. I think it's incredible.
Thank you.
Did did anyone in your life challenge these choices and kind of the way that you were shaping your life around him? Did they give you a hard time? Were your parents being supportive? Did you have friends say anything?
I did up through the years for sure. Yeah. Like initially when I was a teenager, loving Michael from afar, and everyone would tell me like, you're never going to get anywhere near him. He's, the most famous person on the planet. You're just like a regular person, an ordinary girl, and he's got millions of fans and it's never going to happen. And then when I started to follow him and meet him, I had friends say, well, I don't know why you're doing this. You're wasting your time and money. It's like wasting, really? Like, this is my joy. This is my dream, But I think they thought there was a means to the end. Like, oh, I was doing this because I wanted to like be his wife or have his babies or something. Like, I think people thought of it in a different way than it actually was. Like, I was just being there to be there. And it was just a joy, there was no greater joy for me, but I don't think people quite got that it was just the joy of it. And it wasn't just seeing Michael, it was primarily seeing Michael, but also seeing my friends whenever I traveled in those early years. And, many of them are my best friends to this day, and just spending time around them and around his world. And it was just a really cool experience getting to travel and so on. By the time I was in LA, no, I didn't have anyone in my life who was like that anymore. I think people here are really open-minded and, they're like, hey, if it makes you happy, just go for it. And if anyone had a problem with it, they weren't telling me about it.
Well, good. What about, you have talked a bit about the fan community dynamics, and at this point, Michael Jackson was really starting to, recognize you and know you. Did you get pushback or jealousy or bullying from others in the fan community either? It sounds like maybe not on person, but maybe online. Did you experience any of that?
Yes, to a certain extent. Like I know, and the reason I got a lot of attention wasn't really because I was becoming closer to Michael, but because there were these photographs that popped up online because I was seeing him in LA. And of course, everywhere he goes in LA, there are paparazzi. And so paparazzi were capturing these pictures of him, and I happened to be standing beside him, or maybe he was hugging me at the time. And so that's really what made me a focal point among the online fan community. And there were definitely people who were not very flattering about me and called me a stalker and, said I must be sleeping with his bodyguards to get close to him and all of this kind of stuff. And I had never actually frequented online forums, not for any like bad reason. It's just, I think when I became a fan I was already connecting with people in real life, so I didn't need that. I'm sure if fan forums had been around when I was younger, I definitely would have been participating in them. But my friends would tell me, "Oh, look, they're talking about you on this forum," and I would go and look. And it was very mixed. It was some very positive things, some very negative. And then honestly, I just stopped looking because I was like, oh, it's just, they're not really talking about me. They're talking about an image in a photograph. I shouldn't take it personally. And from then on, I was so absorbed in what I was actually experiencing in real life that this was kind of more of an abstraction. It didn't really affect me in any way. And all the fans I was with in person were super sweet and lovely. And most of them were followers I'd known for years. Or in Vegas, there were like a couple of local fans that would come by, and they were really lovely. So it was only really in LA that there were a few people who were very upset by how much attention Michael was giving me and about my private visits. But my friends were like super supportive. They never made me feel bad for any of that. They were just, the nicest people in the world. Arus and Talin included, especially. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and you talk about that in the book too, that, your circle of close friends, you guys would support kind of whoever managed to get the interaction that day, and there seemed to really be no jealousy or anything going
Yeah.
on. It was just a lot of love and supporting whoever it worked out for at that
And
moment.
honestly, that was amazing. I'd never experienced that before in my life. Like I was largely alone in Vegas. Certainly in '07, it was only me and like a couple of other girls who ever got to see Michael at the house. And then '08, there was a few more people, all really lovely. But to be around like this big group and it's new people, I expected like I might get, a little bit of with jealousy, and that just never happened. These people were not like that. They were just the nicest fans you could ever hope to meet. So there was really no fan drama for much of the time there, and that was wonderful.
It's really hard to not like Talitha because she's so great and she's so
Oh,
nice that
Celine.
seeing her, I mean, we'd been in situations together like the trial, but our paths had never crossed until 2008. And I'm sure ours too, but I'd seen pictures of her on fan forums and whatnot and heard all the gossip happening, which I didn't pay much attention to, but I was always like, who's this girl? Why have I never seen her? And then to actually meet her in person, you can't be jealous. You can't have any animosity against her because she's just so sweet and so great.
Oh, Celine. Thank you. Well, right back at you, girl. Yeah.
I definitely get the sense of all the warmth going on between all of you guys, and I think it's lovely and fantastic. And also being able to, not pay attention to the online drama. I'm speaking from personal experience and a lot of Twitter drama lately,
Oh,
so
really? Oh no, I'm sorry.
so I think, yeah, not letting it bother you is a great.
Just on it still continues, right? Just on different platforms.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So we'll always exist somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you walk us through just like a little bit of what it was actually like, waiting outside of Michael Jackson's Las Vegas home and how you would interact with him? Did he, pass through and just say hi to you? Did he, roll down the window and have conversations? Can you just kind of give us a little example of what that looked like for fans who never got to experience that themselves?
Okay, sure. So I would say there was a contrast between '07 and '08. So in '07, I mean, it's the same basic experience. Like he would come out and stop and call me over, and, he'd slide the window down and we would chat for a while. And that was usually what happened in '07, especially. But there were a couple of occasions when I spent a little more time with him. For example, when I write about in my book is when he invited three of us who were waiting outside to go on a limousine ride with him. And so we got to hang out with him and the children. That was really amazing. But that was the exception. Mostly it was, window drop, as we came to call it later in LA, and then just a little exchange with him. And I would give him a letter like every day. I always wrote prolifically to Michael, and that was for many years my primary form of expression to him, was just to pour my heart out in letters. So I'd always give him a letter. Sometimes I might have a little gift for him, and we would just chat. He'd ask me how I was, and we talk about anything that you would with any person in your life. The weather, what he was up to that day. Maybe a question I might have about his music or art or whatever. We have a little chat. And so that was generally what it was like. But then '08 was really special. So he moved back. He moved to a different house in Vegas in 2008. And I started seeing them there, especially in the final months of that year. The final months that he was there. So September, October. And oh my goodness, he would stop for 10, 15, 20 minutes. He called me for the first time. We had a really long conversation in early September. He invited me to a movie with him and his children at the Palms. So we went to a private screening there together. He started writing me letters. I continued to write him letters, of course. It's where I got to know his children as well and got to spend time with them. So that was a really amazing experience. And for some reason, like he was super accessible and just would stop almost every day for a very long time. And the followers who came, who had been around him or following him since the late 1980s, they also told me that was like their most amazing time in his world. And they'd never seen him like that before. So I think he was perhaps healing from the trauma of the trial a little more and felt, more confident. I think he was getting his confidence back at that stage. And I also think he was getting ready for a comeback. I really do. I think he wanted to like reconnect with his fans in a big way. So he'd always ask us like about our favorite songs, our favorite music, what performances we liked the most. So that was a lot of the conversation during that time.
You mentioned Michael's kids, and you did get to know, as you've written about in the book, that you really got to know them. And it seems like especially Paris, you kind of connected with most of the between the three kids. Can you speak to that a bit, and also what Michael was like as a dad?
Oh my gosh, he was such a wonderful father. I mean, it sounds cliched. I know we say that about so many people, but no, he was so amazing. It was incredible to be around him and the children together and to witness that interaction. He was just so open with them, and there was a mutual love and respect that was very apparent. He also created an environment for them that was extremely nurturing, full of play and art and music and books and imagination. They had very limited screen time. They were only allowed online on children's websites while supervised. They watched movies together. They would go to the Palms movie theater most weekends. And the children were just wonderful. I mean, like, yeah, sure, like any, well brought up, polite, kind, sweet children, but they also had that little bit of magic that Michael has, in abundance. They also had a little bit of that. And I remember one time, so there's this follower that a lot of people recognize the name Waldo. He's known as Waldo. His name is
Mhm,
Justin
mhm,
from England.
yes.
Yeah, he's kind of famous, so he's really cool. And he came by the house in Vegas for maybe a couple of weeks during that period. And at one point, so I met Michael and the children with Justin. It was just the two of us. And he spent the whole time talking to Michael. And I spent the whole time talking to the children. And at one point, Justin started teasing Michael, saying, like, Talia's ignoring you, Michael. And like teasing him. And he told me afterwards he'd never in his life seen a fan being around Michael and not giving him their full attention. And of course, I was very spoiled at this stage. I was seeing Michael almost every day, but it wasn't just that. It was those children were so captivating. They were probably the only people in the world who could draw my attention away from him.
Well, that's fantastic, and they have grown up into being amazing young
Mhm.
adults
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think he tried really hard to protect them from the harshness of the world in general, and including in relation to him. They didn't know anything about, as far as I know, about the tabloid stories and all of the lies or anything like that. He wanted
Really.
to protect
Mhm.
them. And he talked to me about that, and he talked to me about, how he knew they were getting older now, and he wouldn't be able to protect them to that extent forever, and that scared him a little. But what he wanted for them is what every parent, I think, wants for their children, to find their own path and to find true happiness and true love. And I really hope they have, or they will, if they haven't yet. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. So, at this point in your journey as a fan and also in Michael Jackson's life, we're reaching a tough time for all fans. So, this is when Michael Jackson moved back to LA as at the very end of 2008, and he lived in the Carrollwood Drive house, which he would live in, of course, for the last several months of his life. He was seeing doctors quite frequently at this point. You were often there and meeting him before or after those appointments. Looking back now, how would you assess his health and overall state of being at this particular point in the early months of 2009?
In the early months of 2009, he seemed absolutely fine for the most part. Well, I started seeing him really quite often again in March. That's when he started to go out a lot more. So March, April, May, I saw him. I don't know, every other day for much of that time. And yes, he went to the doctor, and those visits became more frequent and longer as the weeks went on, and especially into April. Sometimes he would come out and be in a groggy state, and it was very apparent. And obviously, I didn't like seeing him like that. It was worrying, but at the same time, he was leaving a doctor's office. So it was obvious that he was undergoing a procedure that required sedation. So, in that sense, it was worrying, yes, but you could understand the reason why. And other than that, I didn't see any signs of anything being wrong in those first months. He seemed just the usual Michael, happy, engaging, open, shy, all of those things that he'd always been. He was the same Michael.
Yeah, definitely. I agree, definitely. In January, February of 2009, we definitely saw him less because he didn't go out as much, but even in March, April, he seemed very fine and healthy.
And was there any chat among the fans about him, like any concern about him being groggy, or Talitha, as you said, you just assumed he was having any procedure done that someone else would have done and had been sedated and that was a normal thing? Was there any level of concern
No, there
really?
was. There was a level of concern. We did talk about it with each other. I mean, obviously, we would talk about everything. And yeah, that was definitely something we discussed. But as I said,
Mhm.
we're trying not
Yeah.
to overreact. We also were concerned about the number of concerts ballooning so quickly, and thought, is he being pressured into this? But again, because he seemed fine, we kind of took the cue from him that everything was okay.
Right. Probably would have been in the same situation as you, and you have to trust what he's telling you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So speaking of This Is It, of course, most fans are aware that Michael never wanted the This Is It concerts to balloon to 50 shows. So what was your take on this? And do you think, was Michael genuinely excited about doing those smaller number of shows initially?
Yeah, I think he definitely was. It's something he had talked to me about for years, even back in '07 in Vegas. He was talking about wanting to tour, but only to do tours on a much smaller scale. He always said the same thing. He wanted to do a series of exclusive concerts at major cities, so London, Tokyo, New York, Sydney, and so on. He specifically said he never wanted to tour again, like he had on the scale of the past tours, such as Bad and History and Dangerous. So like I said, when the tour was announced, and I think we heard 10 concerts at first, and 10 concerts in London sounded perfect. That sounded exactly like what he would have been planning to do for years. And I'm sure he would have been very excited to do that. But absolutely, obvious. We all know by now that he did not agree to do 50 shows. I don't think he even agreed to do 30 shows.
When did you then fully realize how unhappy he was with this ballooning of the number of concerts?
The first time he expressed anything to me about being unhappy about the tour was, I think it was the 29th of May, it was late May. He invited a small group of us, we were around 10 people, into a studio in center staging at Burbank. And he said that he wasn't happy with the tour. He wasn't happy with the schedule. He said they scheduled it wrong. And he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, "I'm only one man." And I
Mhm.
think that statement just really says it all, that he felt like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. So that was really the first time I knew about any of his dissatisfaction with what was happening.
That encounter was definitely crushing. I do remember that too when he said he's just one man and his voice crackled.
Yeah.
Would you like to speak any more to that, Talene?
I mean, that was really the first sign uh, uh, of concern that we had, like a collective concern that we had. We obviously knew from the beginning that the 50 concerts didn't seem like something he'd be okay with, but that was the first indication or direct communication that we had from him where he felt like he wasn't in control of what had been scheduled. both the number of concerts and the schedule, the the dates of those concerts. And then he just, I don't, it was the first time that we'd seen him, just everything weighing down on him, and him saying that he's only one man. And that's where it all escalated.
Right. I did want to ask one thing in relation to the number of concerts. So my understanding is that the contract Michael signed was for 31 concerts with the option to add more. And then he was telling fans that he had only signed on for 10. What's your understanding of that particular situation?
I think I'd heard about the contract too, but it's likely that he probably, I mean, he must have had lawyers to read through the contracts, right? I can't imagine he sat there and read dozens of pages of what he was signing. He pays other people for that. But I it definitely seemed like 10, and I think 10 was announced, and we were under the impression that it was 10. It was until later that we
Right.
heard that it was 30, that the contract was signed for 30.
Yeah, because nothing was spelled out at the press conference in London. So I'm
Hmm.
I'm kind of like fuzzy on how we even heard 30. I think that was confirmed soon after. But initially, yeah, we had heard 10. So it was all like a little bit confusing during those weeks. But if there's a fan that he told he initially agreed to 10, I don't know. I'd never heard that at the time. And I don't know who that fan is. So,
Okay. I just wanted to clarify
okay.
that because we have those different numbers floating around. So everything you were starting to get concerned, you were starting to, see signs that maybe not all was well. But you were trusting in Michael, of course, which is understandable. But you do write in your book, Talitha, that June 16th, 2009 was a turning point for you when you realized how bad things had gotten for Michael. And I know this part we're getting into things that are a little bit difficult, but can you talk to us a bit about what was going on at that particular moment that changed your understanding of the situation?
Yeah, okay. So, as I said, the first I knew that anything was wrong was the end of May when he invited us into his studio. And unfortunately, from that point on, we all felt quite shut out and unable to speak with him, whereas we'd had very much free access up until that point, and we could be sure of being able to have a conversation with him if we wanted to. And now suddenly, all we were getting was a couple of seconds here or there, and I think there were many reasons for that, which I do go into in the book. But one of them is I believe we were being shut out on purpose, that the powers that be did not want us to be in direct contact with Michael, because they didn't want anyone around him that was putting him first and not the tour. But nonetheless, we were still trying to reach him every way we could. We would write letters expressing, our concerns with what he told us in May, and also just a lot of encouragement, a lot of support, and a reminder that he was the important one here. Like, this tour was his; it didn't belong to anybody else. And if he wasn't happy with something, then he should change it. And if anyone got in his way, like basically not allow that to happen. It was his tour. He was Michael Jackson. It was not about
Mhm.
anybody else. So still continue to express that through letters. But on June 16th, that was really the first day that I realized that the tour was having an impact on him physically and psychologically. It wasn't just a concern or a worry or an unhappiness. It was something far deeper and greater than that. And there were a few things that happened that day. The first was that Michael Amir actually told one of my friends, a male friend who was visiting from England, that Michael was suffering from insomnia. So this was the first we heard of that he wasn't sleeping well. And obviously that's an indication of, him being very stressed out and unhappy. He was never a great sleeper, but to suffer from insomnia is something else altogether. And then that evening, he went to the forum and he stayed there for many hours. And when he left, I met him back outside Carrollwood. And my friend, who I just mentioned, had actually just left. And so I was trying to tell Michael that he had left, and he'd had a message from him, and I was relaying that. And Michael just kept repeating my words to me, like they didn't make sense to him. And he seemed really disorientated. He didn't seem to understand what was going on around him. It was very alarming. And when you've been around someone to the extent that I had, and my friends as well. I mean, you're so familiar with him, you know instantly when something's wrong. And so that really scared me, seeing him like that. And I remember turning around to my friends, and my first words to them were, "What's wrong with Michael?" Because it was obviously something. And saw more indications of that over the following days. And we just didn't know what to do. I mean, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know how to help him. We were so on the outside at this stage, especially. All we could do is write him letters, and like I said, have a few seconds here and there. And we were just really caught in this state of limbo for a while.
Which would, really kind of lines up with what Jermaine Jackson also wrote in his book. He said that someone mentioned the noticeable deterioration in his appearance when he took to the stage. That's not Michael up there. He's like a ghost. You've seen how skinny he's getting. And I did want to, just because I really do appreciate that in these last days, you did take a real step to try and get the word out about what was going on. In fact, you wrote an open letter that you were going to try to get to, Elizabeth Taylor, to all these people in his life. I wonder, would you be all right with me reading this letter? I would love listeners to hear this in full. Is that okay with you, Talitha?
Absolutely. And I helped to write that, but a few of us wrote that together.
Oh, great, great. Yeah, so this is the jointly written open letter about your concern for Michael. A message about Michael Jackson's current health. To all concerned, you are receiving this letter because you are someone who works with Michael Jackson or who knows him on a personal basis. This is a letter written on behalf of many of Michael's fans, including the group living in and visiting Los Angeles who have had contact with Michael over the past half a year. To get straight to the point, we are gravely concerned about Michael's physical condition and how it appears to have worsened over recent months. With him about to undertake a grueling 50-date concert tour, we felt we could no longer be silent and that it was time to express our worries to him and to everyone in his close circle of friends, family, staff, and colleagues. What we have witnessed is a shockingly underweight man who appears to be in trouble physically and emotionally, and who is single-handedly carrying a huge burden on his shoulders, a burden he has spoken out about. We are not privy to information about his personal health or medical conditions and understand we may be misinformed or unaware of certain details. We respect Michael's right to privacy and we do not wish to invade it. But the fact is, we believe Michael's health is at risk and that he may need some help, possibly professional help from a doctor. Whether the weight loss is the problem or whether it's a symptom of another condition, we strongly feel that it must be confronted and treated without delay. If you, for even a moment, have had a concern about Michael's current condition, then we beg you to do whatever you can to help him, support him, encourage him, reassure him. If you are in a position to act and you see what is going on, then you can't in good conscience ignore what you see. You are involved. Even as fans, we have struggled with this, talked ourselves out of this, been in denial of this, but we've now seen too much and we can no longer stand back and stay silent. We may be crossing a line, but we are willing to do so because Michael's health and happiness matters to us more than anything else. Remember, we are in a position where financial and professional gain is not a factor. Our motivation is simply love. We are strongly dedicated and loyal to Michael, and our support for him is unwavering. But we cannot support a tour that will damage his health and possibly worse. We are turning to you now because you may be our best hope, our only hope. We feel frustrated to see this situation unfolding. We feel helpless because we are on the outside, and we feel terrified of the outcome if no one steps up to help. Please don't turn your back. We are willing to risk our reputations and our good standing with the man who matters most to us. We pray you are willing to take a risk for him also. He said it to us himself a few weeks ago. He is only one man, and he probably could use some support and assistance right now. If you agree there's an issue with Michael's health, please ask yourself what is the right thing to do and do it. We are relying on you for Michael's sake. Can you speak a bit more to that letter and the writing of it and any other details around how that came together?
Yeah. Wow, that's so emotional hearing that read
We
aloud.
need to take a crying break.
Yeah.
I know, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Wow.
Thank God we're not on video.
Really. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that takes me right back to those. Ugh. Yeah, those days were really difficult. We were seeing what we were seeing, which was not the same Michael that we'd all known and loved since childhood. But beyond that, I think there was just an intuitive feeling that something was really wrong. And I remember like having a sense of panic, like we need to do something and we need to do it now. Otherwise, something terrible is going to happen. And I know some people will roll their eyes at that and say, well, you're saying that now, but did you really think that at the time? But I did. I did think that and I did feel that. And a lot of other people did too. It was just so much pressure to act. And of course, I wish we had distributed that open letter right away, but we never did because we wanted to approach Michael first. And we didn't know how little time we had left. We had no idea, and this was written, I believe, on the 22nd of June.
Mhm.
So, you're talking about days. And we thought, we're going to give our letters to Michael because we all wrote him letters, us and fans from around the world, followers he would have known and recognized. And they sent their letters to LA. We wanted to give him the letters and we wanted to approach him directly with our concerns first before we took any further action. We thought that was the best way to go. We thought it was the most respectful way to go because we didn't just love Michael. We respected him too. And we respected his right to privacy and we didn't want to, intrude on that ever. And I know people will think by default we were intruding because we were always there, but it's because he invited us to be there. He asked us to be there and he told us that we made him happy and it made him feel loved and less lonely. And that's always what we were there to do, to support him.
Mhm.
And we of course didn't want to doubt him either. That was a big concern with me was, he could be just fine and we're perceiving this the wrong way, but we didn't want to doubt him and his ability to go on with the concerts if we had it all wrong
Yeah,
with our concerns.
yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. That was a big concern too, that he would see this as us not having faith in him.
Hmm.
So we had to, weigh our words very carefully and really consider what we were doing and hope that it was the right thing.
But there was no doubt that it was a big concern for all of us, and we had a gut feeling, I think, separately, and then eventually we spoke up and saw that we were pretty much thinking along the same lines.
So, with all of this in mind, if we're really looking at the last few days, so you actually, first of all, had this absolute like high of an experience where you got to see Michael rehearsing for This Is It literally hours before he would no longer be with us. And it was that night, in fact, that you tried very hard to get a message to him directly. Would one of you, whoever is willing to walk us through even a little bit of this, could you tell us a bit about that evening?
Okay, well, I'll do as much as I can. So we're talking about June 24th. We'd actually tried to give the letters to Michael on June 23rd, but by then it was pretty chaotic around him. There was a bit of a circus atmosphere. He was getting ready to leave for London. He would have left, a couple of weeks after that. So there were a lot more paparazzi, a lot more autograph hunters. There were also onlookers, which we'd never had before, but suddenly there were people just coming by Carlwood and standing outside hoping to catch a glimpse. So when he came out on June 23rd, it was absolutely chaotic. There was no opportunity to talk to him or hand him the letters. He actually went to the Staples Center for the first time that evening, and he drove right in, he drove right out. We didn't get to talk to him. So the next day was June 24th, and it had fallen to a follower called Jill and I to hand over the letters to Michael. Somehow we got elected to do that. And so we came up with a plan. We thought we're not going to be able to give them to him at the house. It was already really chaotic there. But maybe if we go ahead to the Staples Center, and maybe if he goes to the Staples Center again, and if everybody stays back and it's just Jill and me, we were pretty confident that he would stop and he would talk to us. So we shared our plan with everybody, and everyone agreed to stay back, even though, it would have been their last opportunity to see Michael. Of course, none of us knew that at the time, but either way, it was incredibly selfless of them because we all treasured every opportunity to see him. That's why we were there, to try to see him and obviously give him our letters and whatever. So for people to actually agree not to approach was a huge deal. I don't know if that had ever happened before, but it was because everyone was so concerned and everyone wanted Michael to get these letters and knew how important they were. And he was the priority. Everyone put him first. So that evening, Jill and I went ahead to the Staples Center. When Michael arrived, he, as we expected, stopped the car. The window went down. I handed the letters directly into his hands, and I told him repeatedly that they were very important, that they were from fans all over the world, that it was imperative that he read them. And he nodded and he agreed and he said he would. And then we'd also prepared a statement, which is very similar to the open letter that you read out. So it was very similar in content. And we'd prepared that. And Jill was going to read that statement to him. So I asked him, would it be okay if she read him a statement? And he said yes. But at that point, Michael Amir, who's Michael's assistant, spoke up and he said, no, we'll do it on the phone instead. So then the van, the Escalade, it disappeared down into the garage at the Staples Center. And immediately my phone rang. And I picked it up, but all I could hear was static. The reception was really bad. And that happened another couple of times. And I never got to talk to Michael, and Jill didn't get to read the statement to him. So unfortunately, that part of the plan failed. But we did get the letters into his hands.
It's very tough.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think, Talitha, you touch on this a little bit in the book, but the thing that bothered me a lot at that time was how much cut off we were and how security had created this this block for us. It wasn't just the number of fans and the onlookers and the extra paparazzi. Yes, those were definitely factors, but security was also keeping us, the ones that had been around and the ones that they personally knew, they were keeping us away from him, and that never really made sense to me what the logic behind that was. They kept saying, oh, he's in London mode, he's in concert mode, and it was for his security. But I still, to this day, I'm not fully sure what the reasoning behind that was, and I'm still a little bit suspicious as to why that was happening. And that last night when Talitha and Jill saw the Escalades go into the Staples Center, Michael Amir was sitting in the back seat with Michael, and ever since the beginning of June or that mid-June day when we all huddled and said something is wrong, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, are they controlling him? Is something happening? Of course, we knew less then than we know now, but it still bothers me to this day the way security was acting and the measures they were taking and who the instructions were from. Were they from Michael himself, who wanted to be more protected, or was it from the concert managers that were protecting the concerts and not Michael, the person?
Yeah, exactly. I agree with everything she just said.
I did want to ask you about specifically Michael Amir as well, because it really does seem like he in particular interfered with efforts to get in touch with Michael directly. Do you have any additional thoughts about him specifically, or do you feel like he was just part of kind of the whole system where this strange behavior was happening?
I can touch on that.
Yeah.
I noticed that Michael Amir was extremely nice to all the fans when we were like at Hotel Bel Air and the other months prior to like Staples Center. But then his personality kind of changed and he got really blocked off to the fans as well. And again, we don't know if that was like instructions from like concert management or just everything had just been changing at that point.
And these guys were, I mean, yes, Alberto had been around, but Michael Amir and Fahim were these young guys that were so new to Michael's entourage, yet they were the ones that were like in charge and responsible. Just, I don't know, a little strange.
I mean, he had a lot of different security come and go though over the years. So I wouldn't say that
that's
was
true.
that unusual, but yeah, there was definitely a change in the last weeks, and we had extra security. Do you guys remember? There were so many extra bodyguards, and like even when we would go back to the house at Carlwood, and maybe there were only 5 or 8 of us there, whereas before it was like no big deal. We could just wait, and Michael would come and the windows would go down and we would chat to him. But now
Mhm.
these bodyguards would come out, and security guards, and they would line up and block us, so we couldn't even approach the Escalade. And it wasn't like there was a lot of us, and it wasn't like there were strangers. It was the same people, and they knew
Yeah.
we were completely calm and that we weren't a threat. So why this escalation in those final weeks? I mean, we'll never know. All we can do is speculate. But I have heard rumors, definitely, that people involved in the tour said there were specific instructions to keep us away from Michael, especially after a meeting in May. They didn't want anyone telling him, if you don't want to do the tour, just cancel. That
Yeah.
was the last thing they wanted.
Well, you do have one line in the book, if I'm recalling correctly, that's something about how they would tell you that Michael was in tour mode now
Yes.
and couldn't be accessible, right?
Right. Right. And, we accepted that to a certain extent. Okay, that makes sense. But then it kind of doesn't when there's only a few of us. Like, obviously, once they got to London, it was going to be crazy. It was going to be chaotic, and they would have to be a lot more, like holding fans back, and they'd have to do a bigger security job there for sure. But most of the time in June, it was still just the same few of us, and they were acting like suddenly we were a security threat. Didn't really make sense.
Yeah, I mean, the concert mode made sense to a certain extent, but there was definitely a fine line where we were just cut off. It was bizarre. And that still kind of remains a puzzle.
And the fact that Michael Amir was in the back seat with Michael, I cannot emphasize enough how bizarre that was. And actually, the fans, when Jill and I were waiting at the Staples Center, and the other fans were on the phone with us, telling us like where Michael was, and they had told us, "Oh, it's only Fahim in the car with him," and we thought, "Great, it's only Fahim. That's awesome," because normally there would be Fahim and Michael Amir sitting in the front, but it's because they didn't get close enough at the house to see that Michael Amir was at the back. So when that window went down and I saw Michael Amir at the back, I did a double take, because I had never seen anyone on the back of the Escalade with Michael except his children. And that's over so many months, in Vegas and in LA in 07, 08, 09. Never, ever, ever had I seen another person back there. So to see Michael Amir sitting next to him was absolutely bizarre and weird. And now the fact that it was the last night of Michael's life, what does it mean? I don't know. But it's extremely strange. And actually, Michael Amir lied about that on the stand. When he was asked directly where he was sitting in the car on the last night, he said he was sitting in the front, and he wasn't. He was
You're
sitting in the back.
kidding.
No, I swear,
Oh,
you can
wow.
look it up. Yeah, you can look that up. He testified that, and I believe Fahim was also asked about it and said the same thing. He also lied. So that makes me
I
even more
wonder
suspicious.
if he was, so that was the same. I was at the house when he left the house. And that was the day that I handed him the autograph that I'd asked for, because I wanted an autograph before he went to London. I saw him all these months and never once asked for an autograph, because that wasn't my concern or my intent. But I feel like maybe Michael Amir was sitting in the front. Now I don't remember. But the other odd thing was we couldn't hand anything directly to Michael, as if like we're going to hand him a bomb or something. These are the same girls that have been around for months and have seen Michael, and their best interest is in Michael. And now we can't like hand him a letter or a card. It has to go to security, and then security collects it and puts it aside for him. Just ridiculous.
Wait, so you think Amir was in the front when he left the house?
Maybe, I don't know.
And he climbed into the back? That's even weirder. I don't know, because the girls told us only Fahim was in the car. So I think Amir must have been in the back.
Maybe.
Anyway, but yeah, that was weird too. And actually, when I was handing over the letters, I had to hand them 3 times into the Escalade before they went into Michael's hands, because Fahim tried to take them the first 2 times. And every time I would reach in, Fahim would reach out to take them, and I would withdraw them and try again. And it was on the 3rd attempt that I got them into Michael's hands, because there was no way.
And you were always able to hand him things directly before this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, before the last few weeks, or the last 3 weeks or so, Michael would roll down his own window. But after these extra precautions, extra security, and us being cut off, it was only the driver's window that went down. Michael's window almost never went down.
Yeah.
The moment of in your book, Talitha, the moment of you seeing Michael Amir in the back seat with him is so striking and so powerful. I think just how your shock at that and what a big deal that was really comes through quite powerfully. So it's pretty interesting to hear all three of you, talk a little bit more in depth about that. I agree. It seems quite strange and suspicious to me as well, and pretty upsetting. I did want to ask one other question related to what you saw or heard on the This Is It rehearsals. Going back to Jermaine's book for just a moment, he does have one line and one quote where he writes, "On one occasion, Michael deliberately spoke into his mic as he walked off stage. I just want someone to be nice to me today. A voice from the floor yelled back, if we could just have a coherent person here today." And Michael says, "They wouldn't speak to me like that if Joseph was here." I know you, of course, weren't not seeing all these rehearsals, but in the little bits you kind of saw and heard, did you hear anything at all like that going on?
Oh no, absolutely not. No, I mean, we had very limited access, and we only heard up until the last night. We only heard parts here and there, and it was mostly the music that we heard. So we didn't hear interaction between Michael and other people. But that's really shocking to hear. That's horrible. I'd never heard that before. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, it's pretty terrible.
I think I speak for all three of us when I know there's a lot we don't know because, we had to kind of turn away from that world after we lost him
Sure.
just to cope. So I'm sure there's a lot we don't know. We know what we saw and what we experienced and what's come out in the
Yeah.
last 10 years, not so much.
Sure. Yeah, totally. And that's completely fair and would have been the situation I think for any of us. Though so kind of reflecting on everything we've just gone over with, Michael Amir and what you guys were seeing, I mean, in your opinion, just how negligent were the people surrounding Michael Jackson prior to his death?
Oh, extremely negligent. I mean, on the one hand, Conrad Murray alone is directly responsible for what Conrad Murray did, and nobody in the world could have foreseen that or predicted it. So, in that sense, only Conrad Murray is responsible for killing Michael. However, the reason that Conrad Murray was present in the first place was because Michael was suffering from severe insomnia. And the reason he was suffering from severe insomnia was because he was stressed out about the tour. He didn't feel like he was in control of the tour. And there were many people who are responsible for that. It's very clear that people were putting themselves first and their egos. It was all about them. It was their show. It was going to be their name in lights as much as his. They were putting their greed first. This was for money. They wanted the tour to go ahead so they could make a lot of money, obviously. People were not putting Michael first. I don't think anybody in power involved in that tour went to him and said, "Hey, what's wrong? Are you not happy? What are you not happy about? What do we need to change? How can we make you happy? You're the boss. It's you. You're Michael Jackson. You're the reason this tour is happening. The rest of us are expendable." I mean, no disrespect, but any of them could have dropped dead and the tour would have gone ahead. Michael was the one key component, and he should have been given that respect that he deserved. And I feel so sad that there was nobody in his corner with that power and position who could have gone in there and said, "Hey, this is Michael Jackson. If he's not happy, you fix it. You make it right." I wish there was someone in his life like that, be it a manager or a partner or whatever. If his children were, older, 5, 10 years older, I think that would have been them. They would have been going in there and making sure things were done according to Michael's wishes. So absolutely, there are people who were negligent. There are people who are responsible and have blood in their hands because they put themselves first and they didn't care about Michael. They didn't care about this man, this fragile, beautiful soul who had now the whole world, the weight of the world on his shoulders, who'd been through hell and who was their artist, their performer. And they should have been doing right by him. So yeah, I definitely hold people responsible, and not everybody. Obviously, not everybody around him. A lot of people wouldn't have necessarily seen what was happening, wouldn't have had that close contact, or wouldn't have been in a position to do anything about it. But the people who did and were, yeah, they're absolutely negligent for sure, in my mind.
Well, you end your book with a pretty damning and deservedly so condemnation of Conrad Murray, which I first of all, I just want to make sure all listeners, you do need to go buy this book. I think it's really powerful in a lot of ways, but in particular, this condemnation of Conrad Murray is really, really a powerful statement, and especially worth reading. You also make a really powerful statement about Michael Jackson's innocence, which is wonderful. So in kind of light of all of this, after Michael's passing, so how do you feel about watching a film like This Is It?
Oh, well, I've never seen This Is It. Yeah, I've really not listened to Michael for over a decade,
Oh,
unfortunately.
wow.
Yeah, I mean, the grief is it's very traumatic. So I can't risk anything triggering that. I just try to be as numb as possible most of the time.
Mhm, mhm.
Obviously writing this book, I had to go and face certain things, but I did it for a reason and I'm glad I did. But yeah, the reason I haven't seen This Is It is not that I have a moral obligation to it or whatsoever. However, when I first heard of it, it seemed very distasteful because, I could barely breathe. We just lost Michael. It was the most horrific thing to ever happen in my life, personally. And to think that there were people who were trying to make the most of it and trying to find a way to make money out of This Is It and recoup some losses seems so cold and harsh and heartless. But I understand that's how the world works. And I'm glad it exists. I think it should exist as a tribute to his artistic genius, which is what people seem to take away from it, including non-fans. They seem to have a new respect for him as an artist after they've seen This Is It. So, I mean, it's good that it's out there. I just haven't been able to watch it.
I fully understand that. It was very odd watching it, come out and be, and I mean, a lot of us did, initially absolutely celebrate it. But yeah, in light of everything we know now that was going on in those last days in particular, it's pretty devastating, really. So you had tried very, very hard to get this, outcry about what was really going on out. Is there anything that you did that you can speak to that, after Michael passed, in terms of really getting that truth out? I mean, of course, now we have your beautiful book, and I know you were dealing with his passing, which was hugely, hugely devastating, but were you trying to get that message out about the reality of those last days?
Yeah, we definitely made some attempt in the like the first few days to let it be known what we were trying to do and that we had concerns. Now, at the time, we didn't know what had happened. I mean, we'd never heard Conrad Murray's name. We didn't know that his doctor was responsible in any way for Michael's passing. So it was definitely a time of confusion. There were a lot of theories going around, and we didn't know what to believe. We didn't know if there was some kind of conspiracy, or if This Is It organizers were involved in any way, or what had happened. I mean, we didn't know if Michael just, had a heart attack. I mean, we didn't know anything. So we were trying to get the truth out about what we did, but beyond that, it was all kind of theories and speculation. But I did that for a little while and then stopped because, it just became too much.
Yeah, I understand that. Looking back at the last 10 years, how do you, of course, the release of This Is It, but also just in general, how do you have any feelings in particular about how Michael Jackson's estate has handled his legacy for the fans and the public at large?
I'm probably not the best person to speak about this because I haven't really engaged in the fan world or the world of Michael since losing him. I have never seen This Is It. I've never seen the tribute shows. I've never heard this so-called new music that's come out. But I will say I wish the estate had purchased Neverland and turned it into the haven that Michael had wanted it to be. This was Michael's dream, and I wish the estate would consider above all else what would Michael want. And if they had done that, I think they would have bought Neverland. I'm sure that's not something that they consider very much. I think it's all about making money, unfortunately. But I definitely wish that there was a place for fans to go. Neverland would have been ideal, but there should at least be a museum. There should be somewhere where
Yeah.
fans can go to celebrate him. Like, why don't we have a museum? And actually, one of my friends told me recently that a fan had attempted to open a museum, and he created a huge collection of Michael memorabilia, and he was ready to go do it. And the estate said, "Okay, sure, you can do it, but you have to give us like this much money." And it would have made it absolutely unaffordable. And he ended up having to sell all the stuff. So not only that they're not doing it, but they're not supporting fans doing it. If that's true, that's terrible. I sincerely hope that with all of their might and money, that they have done everything in their power to clear Michael's name, because there is only one threat to Michael's legacy, and that's all of the lies that are attached to his name and continue to be attached to his name that are so horrific and disgusting. And I really hope that that's a priority. That should be the priority of the estate, because Michael's legacy, in a purest sense, it's perfect. It doesn't need anybody's help. He created that legacy. That legacy is made of the art that he put into this world, of the expression of the purity of the soul. And nobody can mess with that. That's done. That's a given. That's going to be there forever. And each generation is going to come along and discover Michael, and he will live on in that sense. But the only reason that anybody needs to protect Michael's legacy is to protect him against all of these lies and somehow attempt to unravel them. And I really hope the estate are doing that and making that a priority.
They're not, but they should.
Right.
The state definitely needs to do more instead of just monitoring the rights of previous work.
Yeah, it seems that they spend more time going after fans who are trying to protect Michael's legacy by suing them instead of paying attention to some of the other stuff. But
yeah, why don't we have a museum? He's the greatest entertainer of all time. He deserves to have a museum, whether it's at Neverland or somewhere else.
Yeah, Neverland should be our Graceland. It should be somewhere for fans to go, as well as being a haven for children, sick children, underprivileged children, whatever.
Some kind of nonprofit, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess it's too late now. Neverland's been sold, so.
Yeah, we were just talking about that in our last episode, actually, the Ron Burkle sale. Be interesting to see what happens. And you feel that way even though it was a place that, Michael himself said he would not return to?
I feel that way anyway, because he said he would never return, but he also said he would never sell it. And I still think he would have approved of that. I really do.
Yeah, the last time Neverland came up was when I think there were rumors that it was being sold in November, when we talked to him at Hotel Bel Air, and he made some comment about he's never, Talitha, correct me if I'm wrong, your memory's far better, but he said, I'm never going back there, but I'm never going to sell it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. He came out and talked to like 12, 13 of us for an hour in November at the Hotel Bel Air, and he exactly said that. Yeah. And he'd said that on prior occasions as well.
So coming, ahead a few years, you of course had to get through a lot of grief and a lot of really heavy stuff that was tough. So what made you decide to finally, put all this into a book? How'd you decide to tell your story?
Well, I think it was around 2012, I created a website, a blog about some of my experiences. And the reason I did that was I just wanted it to be a tribute to Michael and the relationship he had with his fans. So it wasn't like so much about me. It wasn't meant to be about me. It was meant to be about him. But I always thought, well, maybe I'll write more one day. And I just kind of left it at that. And then I have friends in my life, Talin, especially Talin, who would tell me every so often, you have to write a book. When are you going to write a book? You have to write a book. And I was always like, no, I can't.
Well, if you've read the book, which the four of us have, you'll see just how unique her experience is, and it gives you shows you a different part of Michael. And that's really important for not just fans, but the world to know, because the fan relationship with Michael and the certain parts of Michael are so unique, and so is Talitha's experience. I felt like it really needed to be shared and documented, again, not just for fans, but for history, for centuries to come.
So she really helped, and other friends, but especially Talin, helped to keep that idea in the forefront of my mind. But I couldn't get there. I couldn't get to a place where I was ready to do that. And I didn't know if I ever would. I was so afraid. I was afraid of exposing myself, because I knew if I was going to write it, I was going to be completely open and honest and bare my soul. And that's a very frightening thing to do, especially when it's connected to, your greatest vulnerability. And so I didn't know if I'd ever reach that point. And then on January 6th, 2020, I had a bike accident. So I was cycling to the gym. It was, a perfect LA day, sunshine, blue skies. I felt great. And next thing you know, my bike went one way, I went with the other, and I smacked my head against the ground. And I guess I was out for a little while. And then I came to, and I could hear someone screaming, and I realized it was me. I guess I was in shock. and I couldn't move for, however long. I just couldn't move at first, and I didn't know the extent of my injuries. And people came and they called 911, and the police came and the ambulance came. And ultimately, like, I was fine. I was really banged up, but I was fine. Thankfully, I didn't sustain any major injuries whatsoever. So I was very lucky, but it shook me up. Like, nothing like that had ever happened to me before in my life. And the next few days, I found myself thinking, oh my God, like, that's how quickly your life can end, Like, you can just be going along thinking everything's wonderful and bang. And like, it kind of made me face my own mortality, because unfortunately, that is how life ends for some people. And I thought, wow, like, what if that had been it, because I didn't bang my head, and who knows how that can go. And I thought, what would I regret if really my life had ended, like, instead of me being absolutely fine, what if it had, or if a car had come at that moment or whatever, what would I regret? And there were only two things that immediately came to mind. One was leaving my loved ones, which of course is unavoidable. And the other was not writing my story and sharing it with the world. And that's the moment I knew, okay, I need to do this. I need to do this, because I cannot leave this world without doing this. And so a few days later, I put pen to paper and I began to write, and the story just flowed. Michael would always talk about when he's creating his art and he felt like he was picking up on something, that it was already created. That's how I felt when I was writing my story. It felt like I was picking up on something that was already written, and I was just like the conduit, and I was just, channeling that onto the page. And I actually wrote the whole book by hand. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, and I would reach for, pen and paper, and just like this expression, it just was flowing through me. I had 6 weeks of just intense creativity, or I couldn't switch it off. I mean, would be in the shower, and then like some part of the book would come to me, and I have to run out and get like a pen and paper, and wherever I was, it was just flowing out. And then I took a break, and I came back and I wrote the rest in another 6 weeks. So I actually wrote the whole book in about 12 weeks. And then
Oh my gosh.
and then of course there was endless rounds of, editing, proofreading. Yeah, but yeah, that, pretty much what you read is what I wrote in those 12 weeks, more or less.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, as somebody who works in book publishing, I'm always curious about this part of the process. Did you try to like go to any traditional publishers, or did you decide from the beginning that you would self-publish, or how did that part of it go for you?
Okay, now initially I was like, okay, I'm going to finish the book and then I'll just send it off to a publisher and I don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's what I told myself. But I think I told myself that so that I wasn't writing it at the same time trying to think how I was going to publish it, because I've never published anything in my life. I've been writing my whole life, but I've never published anything. So, but then when it was complete and it was in my hands, and I was like, okay, no, I need to self-publish this. There's no way I can hand this over to some corporate entity and trust that they'll do what I want to be done with it. Because I mean, once you hand it over to a traditional publisher, they own the story and they can present it however they want. They decide on, the design of the book, the title, and all of these intricacies that are really going to influence the finished product. And I was like, no way, this is my baby. I need to be in control of this beginning to end. And then of course I had to figure out how to do that, because, there's quite a learning curve when it comes to self-publishing. And I am extraordinarily blessed to have as a very best friend, Arus, who is an incredibly gifted designer and had never designed a book before, believe it or not, but thought, hey, I can do this. And oh my God, did she do it? She did such an incredible job. It's amazing. I get so many compliments, and they shouldn't go to me. They should all go to her, because this is her vision, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I love it so much, and I'm so thankful to her. And then I have another dear friend called Ariel, who created drawings for the book. He's got 2 drawings in there, which I think are just so beautiful and, give it another touch of magic. So I'm incredibly grateful to all of my friends who helped me. Talin was a rock. She was amazing. She helped me with the proofreading and just so much.
I did nothing.
Oh, stop it. Stop it.
Just the cheerleader, that's all. I'm just glad the book is out and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Talitha is just a flawless writer.
No,
her writing is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. But I think what nobody can prepare you for when you self-publish is like the 1,000,001 decisions you have to make. Everything from like, okay, what size is your book going to be? But do you want, like, what kind of cover do you want? What's the theme going to be? Do you want gloss? Do you want matte? What about the interior layout? Like, what kind of chapter titles do you want? Do you want any kind of design elements? What about the pictures? How do you want those presented? What kind of formatting should your captions be? And so on and so on and so on. So it was great having Talin as well to like bounce ideas off. And I also have to mention my friend who goes by Moon Street. She's in Ireland and she's been incredible too, and just taking care of the marketing, which is fantastic. So I'm just very, very lucky that I was able to do this.
Well, yeah, and also just all the stuff, like, I mean, getting permissions for these photos, and believe me, I very much appreciate everything you did here. But it's a beautiful, beautiful product, design-wise, and just the whole book itself. And I really have to say that, when I first got the book, I thought, oh gosh, is this just going to be a bunch of fan stories that I'm super jealous of? But I was so immediately really just surprised and just so impressed at all the really interesting insights that are in the book, and how you really do put your absolute heart on the page, and it gives me insight into what it was like to be the kind of fan you were, and the experience you had. And that's pretty amazing, because it was not an experience I myself got to have, and then also giving such incredible frank insight into what was going on those last months as well. So thank you for just really just putting yourself out there. I admire it quite a bit.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. That's so sweet. And, I've been overwhelmed by the response also, just from the fan community in general. It's been really touching. And I'm very touched and flattered. And I'm obviously very glad that it exists. And, I know it's only my story, but I feel like it's reflective of so many fan stories. Whether you ever got to go see them or not, you could maybe relate to the intensity of the love and the connection you feel even from afar. And then for fans who got to see him, I think it's to some extent, if they feel so, then it is their story as well. Because, we all had an individual story with Michael, but there was definitely something universal about it. And I hope I managed to capture that in my books.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes, you absolutely
yeah.
did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very, very well. Well, the one last question I would like to actually ask all three of you, and maybe you can, say your name before you give the answer, so we have it on record as to who's saying what. Is there is a question that we like to ask all of our special guests, and that is, in your view, if you could boil it down to one thing, how should Michael Jackson be remembered? Talitha, would you like to start?
Just a beautiful man and an artist with a heart of gold.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Do you want me to say more? This is a hard one. I didn't know you were going to ask this. So,
Because that's a really hard question.
Talin, would you like to attempt to answer it?
I mean, a true, kind, sensitive soul with magical talent like no other. If I had to come up with something.
Arus, do you want to chime in?
Just like they said, completely magical, and just otherworldly kind of presence that just brings you into a different just state of everything, like just unexplainable, just drawn to him. I don't know. I know a lot of people feel that way. It's hard to explain, but magical, otherworldly, extremely special, obviously, and just forever. He'll, always live.
yeah, and I would say he was absolutely an elevated soul. There was something extraordinarily special about him. It's why fans reach for words like magic, and why we say words like angel or heavenly. I know those words have religious connotations, and we don't mean them, or at least I don't mean them in that sense. It's just, what other words can you reach for when you're trying to describe something so ethereal? And his presence was ethereal, and his music, his art has an ethereal quality to it. And I think that reaches his fans. It reached all of us as children and young teenagers. And I think it will always reach people, as long as there's people on the planet and music in the world. Michael will reach people's hearts, and they'll know who he really was, just as much as we knew who he really was, because you didn't need to know him in person to know that. You can feel it in his art and his music, and that will all of it will stand the test of time.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
Clearly, she's the writer. She has a way with words.
She
Yeah,
does.
I can write them. I don't know if I can speak them so well.
Co-sign all of that.
So
No. This has been wonderful. So thank you so much, ladies. This has been just really incredible. And again, I realize some of these subjects are tough to get into, and there's still some grief and trauma surrounding them. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being so open and talking about all of this. Talitha, where can people find you and buy a copy of your book?
Okay, well, the easiest thing to do is go to michaeljacksonandme.com, and all of the links are there. The book is available on Amazon, but it's also available on Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, Book World, and various retail sites around the world. So hopefully they can find a copy. If not, just reach out on social media. You'll find links on that website to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you need help finding a copy, please do just reach out, and either Moon Street or I will get back to you and help you out if we can.
Yeah. And again, that's michaeljacksonandme.com. Very easy to remember. And Talin and Arus, can people find you online? Do you prefer to keep hidden? Would you like to put into your social media handles out there?
Sure. My handle's at Talin613, TALIN 613.
I prefer not to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Totally fine. We'll just leave that part out. Great. So yeah, thank you all again. I really hope that our listeners, if they have not already, go and purchase a copy of this book. I know that it has been, talked about on a lot of areas of social media, including, I think the Michael Jackson Book Club has been chirping about it a lot as well. And I hope it really does continue to find its audience. And just thank you all so much again for joining us today. It's meant a lot. And yeah, take care. And so I guess that's really it. So I am signing off for this special episode of the MJCast, and want to wish all our listeners the best and remind you to stay bad.